Michelle, TP Bennett, hello and welcome. Megan, Gensler, and Luke from Gensler, welcome to you three. If you could start with some introductions from yourself, and then we'll just take the conversation naturally forward from there. Michelle, if you want to start us off, please.
Yeah, my name is Michelle Heath. I work at TP Bennett. I'm part of one of the design team, and wanted to take part in this panel. Thank you for inviting me, because I don't claim to be an expert in neurodiversity, but it's something that's coming up a lot in my work, and I'm sure a lot of the people in the room are also hearing it. So just really keen to learn more, to advocate, and just be better with what I do on a day-to-day basis and share what I've learned so far, and hopefully learn a ton from everyone else as well, and just continuing that conversation.
Yeah, amazing. Thank you.
So well said. Thanks. Megan Dobstaff, design director at Gensler here in London. I've been with the firm for 14 years now, so it's my third Gensler office. And coming to London, I've done a little bit of work in London, but I've really been working all over Europe. And I think really interested in neurodivergence. We'll get a little bit more into that as someone who had a semi-recent diagnosis in life, as someone who's neurodivergent. But I think, it's such as designers, we so naturally already care about every little sort of experience within place and space. So in a way, it's really exciting that it's coming to the forefront of, I think, the design industry, because I think we are kind of the people who are like perfectly capable of actually solving these problems. So, yeah.
Luke Ward, I'm a strategist at Gensler. I'm autistic and ADHD and a lot of other acronyms that add to the edge as well. So really I'm here on this panel because I try to bring a lived experience perspective. So I'm an advocate within the firm as well. We have groups and advocacy groups where we try to get those stories permeating around the office and making sure that we can genuinely start to solve strategically some of those problems. My day-to-day work looks at all spectrums, no pun intended, but from cities down to interactions. So cities, I might be looking at livability strategies, stage 0 for real estate, all the way down to some retail and brand experience on the interaction side.
Nice, thank you. As a get starting step, Luke, do you want to just sort of let us know some of the awareness about your day-to-day interactions, some of the pitfalls, maybe some of the learnings of how it is on day-to-day, and some of the community that you've been exposed to? You said, how many years have you been exposed to sort of neurodivergence?
35 years.
35. So all the learning and experience you've sort of had in that period?
Yeah, so I mean, it's like square peg, round hole scenario life, and that's how my entire career has played out as well. So I've always tried different things because of the need to. It's a survival tactic, and it's talk about masking a lot and how people interact with their spaces. Right now, there'll be various masks that I'm wearing that I'm not used to having, and I wouldn't have if there was 5 of us together, or versus, I'm in a stadium of 2,000 people.
Sure.
So navigating that has been very much a kind of post-rationalization, I guess. So spending a lot of my time looking at myself and being like, well, what are the things, what are the triggers, what are the things that I need to maybe be a bit more myself? And in our advocacy group, we've created a place and a space where people can do that in communion. You're not just doing this as a single entity trying to figure it out. You're helping give each other the tools. I just so happen to be able to vocalize mine in a way that somewhat seems acceptable to most normal people.
Yeah.
But I think for me, how I see it, and from my own experience as well, I mean, the stats on employment are really, really powerful, and it's less than 30%. So somewhere between 20 and 30% of autistic people are in employment. That's not necessarily full-time. That could be part-time. That could be, 0-hour contracts. And there is a huge drive to try and understand so we can bring and make space for not just autistic people, but all people as a whole. So I think that inclusivity ultimately is a tool that we can use to empower people in multiple remits. But if you're doing it right, you're not just pinpointing individual groups.
Yeah.
You're trying to learn from one group. Is this something that we can use? But yeah, teamwork and trying to stay employed.
Yeah, nice. So if we had to explore the awareness side of it, how do we make it more aware? Megan, Michelle, any sort of awareness insight as a starting?
Okay.
You can rock, paper, scissors if you want to choose.
I was just thinking, do I challenge her?
I mean, from what I've experienced in the industry is that it's kind of twofold, where we have clients who are trying to attract and retain employees. So I feel like this is part of that for sure. It's not just about providing gyms and sleep pods and all that kind of stuff. Like, it has to move beyond that. And then I think also what lockdown pointed out to people was everybody became much more self-aware of what they need to be able to work in a workplace. So I think we have a much sort of more tuned in, self-aware employment base as well, where people realize that they do need less distractions, but they need a bit of noise, all those types of things. People are just much more aware of what they need. So the sort of onus is on us and on clients, employers, to start adapting for those people and to provide those spaces, because it really is such a wide variety of needs for people. And that's maybe not even for people who are who do identify as neurodivergent. It can be people on a day-to-day, regular day where they've had a rough morning and they just need a quieter morning to get some work done. So I think the better we can do at providing for the entire group of people out there, the more successful our clients are going to be, and people are going to feel accepted and comfortable in their workplace.
Yeah. Nice.
Okay, so I will set up with, I think this is how I frameworked this whole thing in my head today. So one of the questions was, what's your experience with neurodiversity? And so the way I answered it initially was denial, because as I said, so I was diagnosed with ADHD when I was 30, so that's about 6 years ago. And I was in a situation where I was working in New York City. I was in a very high intensity job. I was doing, by all means, I was doing excellently at it. I was being published in Interior Design magazine, winning awards, but I went to a psychiatrist and was basically like, I'm going to quit my job because I can't function in a normal amount of time. And I sat with her for, 3 very intensive sessions. And, in the third one, I'm sitting there and she's asking me about depression. And I just kind of turned and looked at her and I said, I'm not depressed. I just tell my mother I will call her back in an hour and I remember 2 days later. There's just too many things to remember and there's too many things to do and I don't have enough time. And she said to me, okay, I hear you. And yes, I think that you do have anxiety, but I believe your anxiety is being caused by the fact that you have ADHD. And I kind of looked at her and laughed. And I was like, well, that's not possible. That can't be possible because I've thought that might be a thing since I was 15. And I've been told that I don't have it. And it's interesting, we were just having a conversation before this about, it was actually, they were talking about it on the New York Times this morning, but just boys being diagnosed with things a lot earlier in their lives, so they have more time to adjust, assess, learn about it, mask it, dim it, all of these things. So I think denial's the first word that I use, because I still have a hard time, like when we were chatting last week and, it's sort of sitting down in the pen, I'm like, no, okay, actually, yes, I am neurodivergent. But this past year, I was really lucky to work with an accessibility and diversity consultant on a big headquarters project here in London for the first time. It was not something that I even knew existed. And it was just such an amazingly cool, eye-opening experience. In a lot of ways, because we were doing a lot of things right, and I think, again, that's sort of back to my point about us being designers, is consideration of sort of all of the different sensory experiences that people can have in space is kind of like ground control rule number one. So I think, leaning into the fact that I don't know, care about all of those things sort of inherently as I move through my day as a design director is, just a really good thing.
Yeah, it's really, really big. Thank you for sharing that. I don't think a lot of people are able to just vocalize that and put it out there. I think admitting it is one of the biggest points you've said. That's quite, you could be told something a million times, it just you deny. So good share, thank you. I'm not sure anyone in the audience sort of knows your story in that depth. So that's the sort of awareness that we want to expose. We want to sort of tear back the layers and get that awareness out, so that if we're going through a journey, we're okay because Megan's gone through a journey, and Michelle's gonna, just tying the bits together, and Luke's on his journey, and together, it's about just getting through we understand what it is. I don't think many people do. So the terminology is really good. I just have a silly question. Accessibility consultant. I have no idea what that is. And if you do, I'm sorry, but I just don't have a clue what that is. If you can.
I think accessibility consultants, and ultimately, I think this goes on to something we were talking about the other day about partnerships, ultimately. Yeah. And again, so there was recently a project with the Bureau Happold guys. They had a brand new office. They have accessibility consultants. They plugged the gap of which we had knowledge of, but not as much knowledge. And they wanted to make that the most inclusive space they could for a variety of people, of course. But also neurodivergence isn't a diagnosis. It's a multitude of umbrella terms underneath that. And that can get very hard. But actually what I would describe it as is you have late life experiences of diagnoses. You have late life experiences of the way in someone's, may have a brain or neurological event that might damage how they would normally be. They might be a different person. My question is, how do we build the right work environments that those people can continue on their employment journeys and continue in a way that helps them thrive in the environment, have control over their environment? And accessibility consultants are doing the best work they can right now. I think there's not enough information overall, but there's a lot of information coming out. So we've got the PASS, which is the British standard. Definitely try and read that up. It's about general neuroinclusion. So things like aids, like having noise cancelling elements within your spaces, and also the built environment in terms of light and sound and curtains and control. So I think, accessibility consultants, you'll find them in engineering firms, but I would argue first in your own company have advocates, and then on the other side try and find your partners and try and work a way of at least getting them into the conversations.
Yeah, nice. So Michelle, do you have any sort of thoughts on how you can design with that in mind, or
Yeah,
include?
absolutely. I mean, there's little things that we can do as easy as sort of color strategies, having areas where colors are more muted, and areas for people who are sort of overstimulated, having softer, gentler colors. Then you can have people who need stimulation, having areas where colors are a bit more vibrant and saturated. But then also, looking at spaces that are quieter, where people can concentrate. Lighting is lower, maybe there's no overhead lighting. There's just so many things that we can do. And I think we do those to an extent already because we love throwing around flexibility. But I think, like Luke said when we were talking previously about flexibility with purpose, yes, which I thought was really great way of sort of rationalizing and making those things that we do pretty inherently, but just making them a bit more thoughtful and intentful. So.
Right. Obvious question, or maybe a silly one again. Flexibility with purpose. I don't really understand what that means or fully, I can't place that really, if I'm honest.
I think for me, it's a term that I would use more strategically, but it's very simple. It's what we do as designers and as strategists. We're trying to find the purpose and the reason behind why that space exists. So you've got a meeting room. There's a purpose to that meeting room. Is it one that's going to have hard conversations inside? Is it going to be ones where it's going to be raucous and people throwing sticky notes everywhere? Is that flexibility? Can you have that up and that down? And we're talking about the sensory element. It's, you get the hypo and the hyper sensitivity. So you've got people that run towards or sensory experience, stimming. You'll see quite often. I jiggle my leg all the time. And then you have the other, which is when you're overstimulated, you are trying to shut off. But then there's also bystanding. So imagine that in a chef situation, like you see a kitchen. And actually, Katie Goudon, who I was on a panel with the other day, who's from the RCA, also helped write the PAS. But she had these playing cards, which I still need to try and get my hands on because they're awesome. Nice. But one of them is the bystander, and that's that idea of, I think that's what most neurotypicals can do, which is like you're sitting in your office and things can be going on and you can still focus. Not always, but... and then there's the sensing, which is this hyperfixation on how and what you feel in a room. And so some people would say it's empathy, right? But actually it's like you can sometimes really truly sense. We were talking about this I can hear about 5 different conversations going on all at once.
Oh.
I don't know what to do with it. Yeah. But it doesn't overstimulate me necessarily. It can do, but depending on the environment. But a lot of the time I'm processing all that information, which is why we need sound protections in spaces and partitions and not just big open plan spaces.
Sure.
I was going to say, I think, one of the sort of outline questions are what are the common sort of traits of neurodiversity? And I kind of jotted down my non-scientific answer to this question is always people who have some version of sensitive senses. And I think, like how does that play out within the sentence? So for sight, right, that's, you mentioned light sensitivity and being either, right, like in really bright spaces or low lit spaces, like make people feel different ways and give people the ability, right, to function in different ways. And the ability to adjust light levels, that's something that we can sort of put into spaces and give people the sort of power to affect. For sound, I learned this yesterday, some people can hear electricity. It's not, wouldn't that drive you mad? It's maybe some people here can hear electricity. Wow. Like, I think I would know it. That would be right, and again, some people can hear the 5 conversations at once. I identify with that. So, the idea of sort of noise canceling headphones, or it seems simple now, but like a quiet card space or sort of phone booth type spaces that give people the ability to get away when they need to. I also wrote that. So touch, we're all designers, right? And so like the hands of things and how they feel. Can affect people adversely, right? So just making sure that there's a diversity of, materials and sort of fabric textures and things when you're sort of fitting out a space. And then obviously taste and smell. I think we know we're related, but an easy one is to put all the microwaves in one place. You don't need to put a microwave on every single floor in every single pantry because it really affects some people have to leave the building at lunchtime because they sort of are extremely affected by smells and things. So I think it's something we've been saying this, but it's sort of flexibility and variability. And you said the sort of, what is it, with purpose, like the design with purpose. Like it's not just about like selecting a material anymore because we think it looks nice or feels nice, or right, like there has to be sort of a reason behind it. It needs to sort of be vetted through these purposeful lenses. And I think it's the last little thing I'll say, like working with this accessibility consultant, us having these sort of conversations, the biggest thing is there is no right answer, and there's no one thing that will fit all. So I think it is about just being really intentional with the variability and sort of controls that we build into our workplaces, so people are able to affect their own environments. So.
And I think that point, it's exactly that co-creation with the workforce that's going to be there. It's like before you kind of designed based on what the client wants, but now it's like, well, no, you should be trying to get studies in, or you should at least have conversations with teams, ask if they have advocacy groups, ask if there are people, even HR, just like, what are the people, who are the people, what are they doing, and how can we best serve them through this workplace? And you've then got evidence, anecdotal or otherwise, to go to the client and say, well, actually, let's steer this into this direction. And with that flexibility, you can say, well, you can have what you wanted, but also this is what people need. And those are two very big questions, right? What do you want versus what do you need?
Yeah. Which is probably something that ties into what Michelle was saying pre-talk, was when we design for the middle of the road. Mm-hmm. I'm not going to steal all your information on that. You can explain that, but essentially that really ties in nicely to that whole concept of designing for the middle of the road and what we should do about that in the future.
Yeah, definitely. Like, right now we sort of just run down the middle with our designs and make them sort of as kind of in between, inoffensive, whatever the case is. But really, if we design for the extreme, the far end of the spectrum, as you might say, then that captures everyone. And I think that's sort of the best result for us as designers, is that we've created spaces that helps and supports and comforts everyone. So I think, we sort of very quickly design spaces that are DDA appropriate. So I think this should be sort of the next leg of that we automatically start breaking that into our design process as well. Yeah.
Is that something you can actively change or drive, or is it more getting into a company and a design culture?
I think it's a bit of both, really. Like I think that's a bit of chicken and egg sort of scenario, where if you've got the culture in the community, then people feel supported to push back and maybe even bring this up with clients, that maybe this hasn't been something but that they've brought up. But maybe you can say, I'd really love to talk to your DE&I group if you have one. We'd like to have regular check-ins with them. So I think, it's very much these sort of settings help inform all of us and empower us. And then, hopefully we can take that away and go to our client meetings and our pitches and say that this is something that we really want to take forward and advocate for.
Yeah.
I don't know how you would feel about that.
Yeah, I think it's the right thing to do. I mean, I make fun of myself all the time because there was a time where I was like, oh, sustainability, everyone else will just know that, and I'll just, someone else will take care of that. And now you can't say that anymore, right? And I think this is, as designers, we care so much about how places feel. That's what we do every day, and there's reason behind that. And again, I think, like, going back to what I said at the top of the hour, we're like the perfect group of people to sort of solve these problems and sort of just put these controls in place, even if, our sort of partner lawyer clients are like, it's like, well, you don't even actually need to know, and you're going to benefit from being in a space, and you're going to love these lighting controls or whatever the thing is. So I think it's like knowledge is power, and designing. I think one of my favorite, on this headquarters project, there's 7 floors. Each floor has like a hub space that has sort of a different concept. We're creating different experiences because people need choice, so they can go to the different places, and they all have a different feeling, a different vibe. And Ian, who works for Freeney Williams, who was our diversity and accessibility consultant, taught us about. It was like we felt so good going into this meeting because we're like, great, yes, we've got high contrast because that's a big thing, right? You need contrast between your sort of big sofas and the area rugs that they're sitting on. And he comes in and he was like, well, I didn't bring there's a machine that measures light LRV, light reflectance value, right? And so the easiest way, so it's like my favorite thing that I learned, but it's so frustrating because he basically, 0% light reflectance value is black, 100% is white, right? So that's like the easiest way to describe this. And so anything that we can all do is, if you have a rendering of a space, right? If you just take it in Photoshop and you make it black and white, your 2 things that are very contrasting for people who can see color, like, look exactly the same, right? And so so then it was like, oh, God, right? And you kind of know that. And so then you start to learn about sort of tonality of things, and it just, again, it allows you to move forward intentionally, and sort of, it actually, the colors didn't need to change that much, but it was just a matter of, again, like their light reflectance value, right? So I think it's, and there's so many sort of wonderful things like that. But I think, again, it's sort of, if you root it through your own sort of sensory perception of what feels right and looks right, and sounds right, you're on the right path.
Yeah, it feels like the smallest thing can be just so powerful for certain people, which is really exciting, and just like proof of how important it really is to go through these processes.
Yeah. It was like years ago, like when I first started out, there was someone, it was for a company called MathWorks, and actually when you think back, he was the CEO and founder, and he probably was on the spectrum in some way. But he said the detail that he caught on to was, before you moved out of the meeting room, we had designed into the wall like trash receptacles for all of their cups that they would sort of naturally bring into the meeting room and sort of leave on the way out. And he was like, that's the thing that it's just, you can really tell that people care about you, right? Because someone like took a minute to sort of assess how they sort of move throughout the day and sort of designs in a trash can into the wall in the meeting room. And it's those things. It's caring about people. It's making people feel cared for in space. Yeah.
And that can go as far as those small moments, but then, I mean, helped produce the BCO's government, or it was a guidance for neurodiversity in the workplace. And one of the key findings was about, well, not secondary entrances, I'm going to say an alternative primary entrance for people, and how you can actually enter into buildings, enter into spaces. Traditionally, we have one entrance because that's the easiest way to do it, and then you might have a bike entrance. And my experience is I used bike entrances because I used to cycle, but also I used to use it because it's the quietest route in to many big atrium spaces that you might be working in. And then you end up with your security passes being revoked, which I did multiple times. But that's where we need to start doing better as well in terms of the whole building supply, which is like, how do people enter? What is that? Rather than just access, it's like, where's the inclusion in that access? So yeah, sure, have your big atrium, have your big wow moment, but have that intentional moment which says, do you know what? Not everybody wants to walk in on espressos being poured right in front of you the moment you come in, and the sounds and the smells and conversations and the scratchy wool on the seats and stuff like that. No, I just want to walk in through a very muted bike shed. Thanks.
Yeah. Those are probably some of the conversations that a small community would have that needs to expand out to the greater majority of everyone, because I don't feel like that inclusivity is even part of conversations. So that's a good example. Do you have any other sort of core primary examples of what you've seen or experienced, or ideas like that in the workplace that could change or need to be spoken about?
Sorry. I think I shared this one with you guys last week. One of the ongoing ones on this headquarters project is, so there are several people actually, that work in the building or will be working in the building who have dwarfism. So there's this whole conversation about bringing the counters down, the islands in all of the pantries to be, a bit lower than your standard height. And then basically a really tall person on the project team was like, well, I have back issues, and so I won't be able to bend down to access this sink. It's actually going to be an issue for me. So now we're in this conversation of maybe every other floor will have a different, we'll have some that are higher, some that are low, but it's I think it's that goes back to that point of there's not going to be one thing that's gonna fit everybody, but it's having those conversations sort of, and I think so many times I do believe that we as designers are, we are the change makers, and we bring new ideas to contractors who've not seen a detail before, who don't necessarily understand sort of a concept of why there is so much variability, right? And there's 500 finishes on a project, but I think it's all about, again, that knowledge share and sort of explaining why, and sort of bringing those conversations to not just your conversations with the client, but you're on site, with the contractor, walking them through and explaining sort of why and sort of how it's meaningful and how it's going to affect everybody who's going to move through those spaces.
It's great, ammunition, if you will, for those conversations. If you have and you understand your audience, you can go and say, well, this is for these people, this is purposeful for that kind of behavior, whether that's a relational conversation, is there certain spaces that are more intimate rather than just all big halls, things like that. But to your point, I think that I'm trying to get it out, but this is where brain dislodges.
Describe it. We can charades it.
Yeah. But yeah, I think it's just being able to know your audience. I think ultimately it's no good ad campaign speaks to no one. It's if you're going to do something, and that retail background that I came from is you have a very specific purpose, and that's to transact at some point, whether that's way into the future. So working with people like Sonos, you're building spaces that weren't necessarily retail spaces. They were all about building people and culture and understanding what that was and bringing it in. But every single detail in those projects that I did with Sonos was all related back to something that somebody could take home. They might notice that the ceiling looked like Berghain, but not everybody would know that. But it's how do you give people delight in those moments? And that's how you become, or the mind starts to open up to being a bit more open and reference how people want spaces.
Yeah. Something, one of the last thing I was thinking about yesterday is, I think one of the questions was, should we not design, what was it? It was should we not design really intensive space or something? I think one of the questions was, and my answer was no, of course we should. We don't want everything to look the same. You don't want, the Museum of Ice Cream to be vanilla. We don't, but the Museum of Ice Cream has people moving through it and then leaving it, right? They're not staying there and trying to, make money for a company that's employing them all day. So, I think there's the hospitality thing too. Everyone wants a hospitality. My worst place to be hospitality. It's well, what does that mean? If you look at the definition of hospitality, it says nothing about what a space looks like. It talks about how a space functions, right? It's about servicing people. It's about feeding them and sort of housing them and taking care of them. So, I think, and then we have that sort of magical power to make that look so many different ways. but it should just be rooted through the sort of actual functionality of what we're trying to make space to do. And then you'll crack it.
And the consistency of that service.
Yeah.
It's like, why do you keep going back to that restaurant or your mum's place or whatever it is, right?
Because it's
Why
like
do
it's
you go
hooked
to
on a
that
feeling like that
destination?
you want to go to, because there are these things that are inherent in our senses that make us feel comfortable. So yeah, form follows purpose, as we say. Like Gensler.
So if you had to take us on a journey on how that would look in an office space, how do we start incorporating that in an office space then? What does that sort of peel that back? How do we bring that journey into the office? So it's fine that we speak about it. It's fine that we're understanding a little bit more, but how do you really bring it to the office? Is there people we need to speak to? Are we speaking to the right people? Is it a culture within a company? Is it, I have no idea, but...
By office, do you mean the design of an office?
The design.
Or do you mean us as a collective, studios, ateliers, offices, firms, whatever we call ourselves?
It would be probably two-phase, but we'll start with the office, because if you can make a small change there, I think it could ripple into the bigger effect, yeah.
I mean, so the project I keep talking about is Virgin Media O2. They're going into Paddington. They have the biggest group of stakeholders that I've ever engaged with. It's amazing that we've actually made it through stage 4, because I mean it's so many people. But they have the steering committee. It's about 10 people who all the big decisions roll up to. But in stage 1, they have and again, you're like, of course you guys do. They have a group within VMO2 called Ultraviolet, and it is their DE&I group. And there's truly, you're like, okay, we really do have a little bit of everybody here. This is amazing. It was like you have people who are like championing sort of that they need not just one prayer room, but separate prayer rooms, right, for separate sexes. You've got people, like I said, with dwarfism. We have there were 2 blind people represented, 3 people in wheelchairs. Like I said, but there were people who identify as non-binary, so we had that representation. I learned through this whole thing, right, like it's wonderful if we let's just make all the bathrooms non-binary, and it's like, actually no, because there are actually people who need to have separate gendered restrooms. So we had this really big cross-section of people, and when you roll things back up to the 10 stakeholders or the 2 partners with their name on the door who are paying for the whole thing and making all the decisions, like if you can sort of move the why back through the sort of people at the heart of the organization, again, it's just sort of you're proving out your reasoning and your why with sort of data, right, from the people who are actually sort of in the organization. So, I know I feel very like we were handed that, but like I will never now not sort of strongly pitch, on a project if that sort of ultraviolet group isn't in place. It's like, who can we get to, who can we talk to? We need a nice sort of cross section of individuals, and really try to push that in the sort of early stage ones, because then you're always going to be able to bring it back to the people, right? And you're going to be able to base it on something. So I think anyway, that's again just another really big thing that I learned, which is because it's not a scientific thing, right? It's not a building code yet, and so much of it never will be. Like we're going to have to root it through just sort of our own data that we can again sort of source and mine from the sort of natural design process that is in place. So I think that would be where to start. Yeah.
Michelle, would you strongly disagree?
No, I pretty much agree. Yeah,
Yeah, okay.
like I think essentially there's not really, at least today, there's not really a formula where it's like, okay, like the first space needs to be muted and then it gradually gets more intense. Yeah, I don't think there's anything like that out there in the world, because no client is the same, no working group is the same. I mean, you might even have something as simple as really strict branding guidelines that you have to work with, but then also incorporate all of these elements into. So yeah, I don't think there's a really set sort of nice laid out map of where different spaces need to go. It's totally going to be dependent on the building, the project, everything. So yeah, I think ultimately at this point in the game, like, we just really need to try, and we really need to try and deliver these types of opportunities for people in order to sort of be the best at our job and allow people to be the best in their settings as well.
Right. Are other elements of design mapped out? Is there a structure? Is there a framework for that?
Not that I've come across. I don't know.
So the PAS
Megan.
starts to talk to elements of aid and basically what you can do in space. It's very lengthy, so there's quite a few recommendations there. I found the one that stuck out to me was the noise cancellation availability, because I was like, nobody speaks about that, and you know how expensive noise cancelling headphones are to the vast majority of the population. There are a few of us who are more privileged in terms of what we can afford to have, and I think it's really important. But that's closest, I think. When we were doing the BCO piece, we were toiling with, is this a guideline? Is it? And we couldn't even get it to guideline level, because we were, let alone legislation and framework that you can apply, because there's just not enough information, and you're going to need the broadest steer group you can possibly imagine to try and get that framework in place. The only thing I can say is we are seeing moves certainly in Gensler. We have inclusive design networks, which is global. You know, we're a firm of 7,000-ish people. And there's such a wealth of resource, and we've got people who really, really champion it, and are like, we've got a research institute as well. Now, yes, we do that at scale, and it's a brilliant piece of resource, but again, it goes down to partnerships. But it's almost, I'm looking at the room and I'm like, who has inclusive design advocacy or inclusive design networks within their studios at the moment? Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned the sustainability, because from that ESG lens, we've had the environmental, the E, and now we're going into the S of the social, and we're seeing a lot more of our clients asking about the S, like, what do we do with the S? Nobody's touching the G yet. It's going to be a bit of a task, isn't it? Truth to power and stuff. But trying to understand some of the lessons that we've learned from, and I love the fact that you've got the gold, silver, bronze, because that is a framework that you can take to your client, and you can say, well, what's your gold, silver, and bronze? In the same way as, for instance, Virgin, if anybody's ever worked with Virgin, they have like a materials lab that basically you send all your stuff to, and they'll test it with blue ink, blood, all sorts of crazy stuff, and then they'll come back and be like, no, you can't have that, or you'll say, yeah, you can use that. So we can do the same with inclusive design. I think it's just everyone in the room, if you can gain the capacity, either bring external people in or stand up, and you know, everybody's clearly interested, I'd hope, if you turned up. How might you start that as individuals or as a collective?
A really good way. So you'll look at their values and their ethos that they say that they are as a company, and be like, oh my God, you guys, you're so sustainable and you're so inclusive. Like, what are you doing about that? And then you're like, wait, oh my God, look, here's some ideas, right?
Yeah.
And it's sort of play it back through. Like, they're saying that that's who they want to be, and they're saying that they believe that they are that. So how do we sort of give them a 3-dimensional tool that sort of like that helps them reinforce who they say that they are? It's pretty cool.
Yeah, I think to create a map or some sort of framework is definitely going to be fast track it, and the fast tracking is
Get on that book.
Yeah, is the 1% better. So yeah, I absolutely love that. I think one of the also key things is history often repeats itself, which is a popular saying. I have recently heard otherwise, that we repeat history. So we know things in the past. We've learned, we've got years and years of knowledge behind us in design. How do we sort of stop the history repeating itself. So just, the typical way of design and implementing change is championed to be different. Like, there needs to be a change in direction, or the input needs to change to get a different output, to be honest. Is that something we can think of some ideas and put on the table? Is it?
I just think don't let denial be an option anymore.
Sure.
Yeah.
Honestly.
Like, you always just have to ask why. Why is this being done this way, and is this the best way to be doing this?
Be annoying.
Yeah.
Literally.
Ask questions. Yeah. Act like the expert that you are. Yeah. In terms of designing
Yeah. Well, I think
space.
trying to find something is better than trying to just suppress it for the sake of not wanting to feel stupid about a question you might have, or I think get things in the air. I guess that's always made the best design decisions.
Good designers, great designers, you have instincts, right? You have instincts about why things should be the way that they are. And oftentimes, even if it is because something like really is it's visually pleasing together, like oftentimes that is the right answer, and there's sort of a reasoning behind that. So it's just, in a way, I think it's kind of amazing that we actually have more sort of factual knowledge to support the it's design's so subjective. It's actually something that I love it so much, but sometimes I'm just like, well, yeah, okay, we have to get up and make these magical sort of woven stories to get people to say yes to so many things, and now it's actually this wonderful, I'm like, oh my God, actual facts that I can apply to these sort of wonderful sort of stories that we're building is just, it's really wonderful and exciting. So I'm excited about it.
Yeah.
Is that something Gensler's doing actively? Is that something within the culture of Gensler's four walls?
I would say so.
Yeah.
And that's been there for two years, more so than any of the other companies I've worked for. That being said, I think obviously there's always movement, but there's so much resource in the company and so many people willing to listen and willing to give you that information or those facts, or if you've got a hunch about something, you've got somebody you can talk to there, and I think that's great. And I think the way it's worked, I think Megan's been at Gensler a long time in comparison to myself, but a lot of neurodiverse people will have, as I said before, quite checkered employment. And not saying unemployed or otherwise, it can move and shift and be quite spiky. And I think Gensler in itself understands that kind of behaviour and actually tries to, when I say try to keep people, not in a coercive fashion,
Welcome in.
but it's that difference is definitely, I've never felt more belonging in a place based on that alone. Yeah. Because it's like, well, do you know what? I do want to move into that space.
Sure.
And it's enough.
Yeah, it's a environment of a good staff retention because you're happy in that space and everyone around you is TP Bennett. Similar sort of journey?
Yeah, definitely. I feel like based on what I've learned about Gensler from the team here, I think there's definitely room to grow for us, but we're definitely making those steps towards it for sure, and allowing people to specialize in different things and ultimately bring their best self to work.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sort of trying to get the aftermath of COVID out of the way. Are you still finding a struggle with bringing people back within the space? Is there a way to make it more inclusive, or is that a thing of the past? It's come and gone.
No, I think clients are still sort of struggling. I know my client is doing sort of like free lunches, things like that, because food speaks volumes. But yeah, I think the Tuesday to Thursday is definitely, and I mean, you can see it now, like TFL has the reduced fee or fare cost on Fridays. So yeah, I think it's still a thing, and I think it's probably the new norm, really. And I think part of me feels like, you know what, if it works for those people, like, have at it, because we talk about like retention of staff. So if they want to work Mondays and Fridays at home, you've got a happy employee who might stay with you for longer. So
Sure.
yeah, I don't think it means anything negative for the employer at all, really. And if anything, I think it teaches us as designers and the client base as well to take less space, ask more of these spaces, to really support the staff that is coming in. So yeah, I think it's just a new sort of challenge for us, really. I don't think it's negative in any sense, really.
And the government's shifting, you mentioned TfL, but the government's shifting as of the 6th of this month to accommodations for flexibility for all staff and all people in the UK. I don't know whether that also is Northern Ireland, but you might want to read up if you have that jurisdiction. But that's like things like job sharing, remote working, hybrid working, part-time, compressed hours, rhythms. So if you're a shift worker, that actually you're not being thrown here, there and everywhere. But it used to be just you can only ask for that accommodation once in 1 year. Now it's twice, and you can change that. And there is legislation there that's moving people into the realm of understanding what flexibility is going to look like in their workforce. And as we say, it's one size fits one, not one size fits all. And that that need to bring people back, I think, it makes sense from a company perspective. And it's just about, have you got the culture that has the capacity to understand what flexibility therefore is.
Sure.
So if you're going to have people back for a certain amount of time, like, be open with what your flexibility policy is going to be. And I think that can be something that designers can help shape, right? Is the space appropriate for a hybrid working model? If people are going to start flooding in, I think it was Boston Consulting Group or someone more recently, although it was Deloitte, suddenly too many people are coming back to the office and they don't have an office at work, so they're looking to expand their spaces. This isn't the only project that's going to happen in.
Yeah.
I think people like rhythms to a certain degree, and certainly speak for myself. Like, I'm in 5 days a week just because I get all my sensory needs met.
Yeah, 100%.
And work ones. I think it is neurodiversity is an umbrella term for, and it was coined some years ago to describe the similar to biodiversity. So neurotypes are different across various landscape. Divergent people, or neurodivergence, it's a movement and a social space to think about. So those are one segment of your population, and therefore, to your point, like that cognitive demand, those cognitive elements, well, what does that look like for someone who's English second language, or don't yet know English, and you walking into space? How do you make sure that the icons make it clear what a toilet is versus? So I think these all come under the same space, which is, if you say neurodiversity, you can add a little bit of the kind of typical, and then you have the atypical, and then everybody will have similar needs based on that alone. Who's going to have the same definition of sustainability in this room? Very rare, right? But I think it's about systems thinking as best as we can, and to the length of which your team is possible, can add to their experience. So if there's 3 of you, as I've been in a room trying to get a business to launch up, you're not going to be able to do deep systems thinking for your clients. But you can start to build those frameworks, the gold, silver, bronzes, and maybe you'll say, well, actually, do we have a framework for sensory, for cognitive, for this, for that? That actually could be a good BD experience as well, right?
The thing I like to say about sensory experiences is actually something that, as a design director, I always ask like the teams do as we're you know, when we're crafting concepts and we're crafting space, is sort of like figure out like run it through the senses. Like, what do you want it to look like? What do you want it to feel like? What do you want it to taste like? What do you want it to smell like? Like, actually think about that and let's try to personify these things. And you know, that's not scientific, right? And again, we're not experts, but it's you're thinking about people, right? And you're starting to sort of define space by how you want people to feel in that space. And something that I think a lot about in terms of like, oh, can I get people to come back to the office? And it's like, what a challenge, right? For us to design places that are so, make people feel so cared for that they would want to go every day. Like, I mean, big task, but that's
challenge on.
That's cool. Yeah, it's like challenge accepted,
Yeah.
right? Yeah, because that is what placemaking is, right? Whether you're trying to go to your favorite restaurant, whether you want to go to the Rose Gardens, whether you want to, you know, go to the aviary, go to, you know, the Barbican. Like, there's so many places, and we go to places because they make us feel a certain way, and we sort of crave those feelings. So, you know, how do we create these sort of diversified workplaces that make people feel cared for in all of these different ways?
And safe.
Yeah.
That's the ultimate thing.
Yeah.
And also, Megan always does these amazing mood boards which look edible. So it's
Thanks. I mean, it's game changing when you're sort of given that opportunity, right? But again, it's sort of like learned that, and now can, even if, you know, which you're going to have people who are like, nope, this is what we want, you know, there's still these, you know, I was going to use like a cauldron was what I was going to say, which sounds like a weird word to say, but like of knowledge out there. It's like, there's got to be a better word than cauldron, but out there that you can sort of move to the next project. But it is, I mean, yes is the answer. We definitely 100% need to be, you know, figuring out how to package yes, right? Yeah. And it's, you know, I think it's so much of it is just, you know, it's like, so it's sort of like get your together, figure out how to present yourself as but like, I can help like navigate this with you, right? Like, I want to champion this. We know these things, you know, about how and why we need to be thinking about this, like in your new modern workplace that you're asking me to design, right? Everyone wants a game-changing, award-winning workplace. And it's like, well, that's not just finishes anymore at all, right? There has to be some like systems thinking behind that. So it's sort of, us all getting our sort of wits about what we do know and kind of saying, this is how we can help you sort of navigate that. And then, you know, I don't know, I'm forever the optimist, but I think that's the wonderful thing about this industry, sort of in every city that I've, you know, worked in and been in, is that it is this sort of lovely, tight-knit community where we can come together and share knowledge. And also a great place to say thanks, Stansons, for like hosting this conversation, because that's where sort of we're all gonna sort of continue to keep learning and sharing. So
it's about elevating those smaller clients as well that can't afford to do the big studies, and you can only do that as you would in design as a whole, right? As we know how to put something together that's going to be slightly cheaper so that you can afford to have a nice workplace, but it might not have the same detailing and so on. It's like bringing that knowledge and just educating yourselves and each other, and no silly questions. Everything is valid. You're just trying to move your peripheral just a little bit wider. But if we can elevate those small companies, I think that's the thing I always think about. It's like the big companies, they often have this and it's a corporate responsibility piece. But if you're working with designing small studios for people, how do you start to at least knowledge provide for them? Or, you know, it's probably small enough to be able to do some interviews at least. Just whack a little extra bit of money on the RFP. Yeah,
100%.
I remember, right? I don't know. I remember a day when it didn't. What did we do? Like, how did we? I remember, like at Gensler, you used to have to know what project was what to go into the find the imagery, right? And then that's how you like gained knowledge about, we used to sort of own that power a bit more, right? And now everyone thinks they're a designer. Everyone can fully generate spaces in AI for themselves and tell you that they've designed, like that it's a wild world out there. But again, I mean, I've been having this conversation, actually. I work in a lot of different circles, but something and it's just me, like I said, I like to think I'm a positive person, but an optimist. But the power that we have is to like connect to people on that like human and sensory level and like get to them there, right? And I always say like to teams too, I'm like, okay, like this is the person you're going to connect with on this project. This is who I got, this is who you got, and it's like find out what makes them tick and solve those sort of purposeful problems for based on what they care about and what they're kind of obsessed with, because everyone's kind of got their different gauges of how they're going to gauge success. But it is, I mean, it's kind of exhausting. We've just been asked to, now we just have to be really smart about everything, and it isn't. I do think about, like we were saying, we both had similar maybe connections to trading spaces of how we somehow fell into this wild world of design that is so much bigger than trading spaces could ever be. But it's like, I'm like, yeah, no, I went to school for trading spaces because that looked fun, and because I could, create palettes and had a, wild sense of creating fashion. But now it's really, we have to. It's all sort of knowledge based, and it has to come from a place of, it's sort of all of those things that we've been talking about. But yeah, it has to be purposeful. It has to be, and that is what will make you the expert, and that is why people will keep coming to us, right? Is because we add that human layer, which AI can't do, and which Pinterest can't do, and which you want it to look like this. It's like, okay, but again, you're going to hate it if it doesn't function the way that you need it to, so.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I've always loved describing my job as being an expert generalist, because I know a little bit about a lot of things. So, and I'm obviously still always trying to build on that. That's why I'm here. That's why we're all here. But humble enough to know, like, okay, I don't know what the M&E requirements for this room is going to be. So, going to get on a phone call with a mechanical engineer. Let's onboard various consultants for furniture, for lighting. Like, we are just a very special. We all work together so much, but then we also learn from each other as well. So we can take it so far, and then you know that you need to bring on board someone else who is definitely an expert in it. And I think that's sort of the wild and wonderful part of our job, because I think, yeah, like Megan said, we have this joint passion and desire to create spaces that are like visually, emotionally, physically amazing for people. So we're just constantly sort of ready to make that happen and doing what you need to do to get there, really.
Yeah.
100%. Right, I think we are running on the time side. I'll leave it with Luke, Megan, Michelle. Any closing comments, anything you wanted to share that you feel we didn't touch on? Could be something, could be nothing.
No, I think we touched on most things, which is that people focus, that experience focus, and that partnership focus. And those are the three things that I always take away is
Sure.
you only know what you know.
Yeah.
Make sure if you want to know more, at least try to stay curious.
Yeah.
Ask questions, and if you don't get the answers, look further.
Sure.
Just make sure that you're doing it with people in mind.
Yeah. Thank you.
I was laughing at one of the questions you guys had sent, which was, what is the worst environment for neurodivergent minds? And I was actually thinking, like, I would love to know what you would say the worst environment is for you, and what you would say the worst environment is for you.
Just to work in a day to day.
Just, no, let's go, like, what's like hell on earth for you, and like a place to be.
Wow.
Ooh.
Like, where are you just like, I'm like, yeah, I don't want to be here, and I try to avoid that
Yeah.
type of space at all costs.
Networking events.
See?
Where there's a lot of
Which isn't spatial,
conversations, and I can't just put on a pair of headphones or put in my little ones.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I think I recently went to a restaurant that had the big exposed ceiling, but hardly any acoustic qualities. So it was really loud, really echoey. There was a hen do of like a dozen women.
Yeah.
And yeah, like I just felt like I was just yelling at I'm not a yeller. And I feel like when I have to be in a restaurant with my friends and I have to like really yell and lean in, it just exhausts me too quickly. I just want to go home.
Yeah.
Michelle, do you have an Megan?
No,
Sorry.
yeah, I said myself, it's sort of a techno club with really repetitive music and like crazy strobe lights is on par with any type of like fluorescently lit like 4500K space at night. It's like the same thing. Like it makes me just want to sleep. Like I just can't, so I would say, yeah. But it's different for everyone.
Yeah, nice.
That's kind of
See,
the point.
I find that environment quite
Diversity.
calming, just not the bright lights, high-level LEDs where I can not just hear electricity, but I can see, like it feels like I'm in 16-bit. I'm sure most people do, but it just feels, it can throw my brain off so much. Like I won't be able to talk.
Yeah.
But techno clubs, I can deal with.
I know.
Kind of
See,
calms.
you
It does
love
calm
it.
me down.
That's what I hear it does to people. I just...
Concerts. It seems so counterintuitive because like you sit me in a pub and I'm like, oh, I know too much.
Yeah.
Because it's
Anyway,
one single audio thing.
diversity of
Yeah.
place.
Right, so we'll wrap that up. I thank you all for your time. There are probably going to be a few questions that you may have. I think our panelists will stay behind for a little bit after this if you want to have a chat to them. You're welcome to. You're also welcome to some food, but just some takeaways is we want to sort of action a few points from today. Can we build a community? Can we coach a team? Can we champion up someone within our organization to talk about it, just create a conversation? I think those conversations need to happen. So if we can go away in our own space and share that information with our own team, I think that's quite powerful. There will be a recording of this that you could sort of back that up with if you wanted to do it more substantially. I think don't deny the obvious. Luke made a good point. Just let's be honest with each other. Let's not deny the obvious. And let's look to get some framework in place to fast track the awareness. Really good takeaways. We will start it in our own space. There'll be a follow-up with the panelists and Stansons to incorporate some sort of change. So we look forward to that. And on that note, I say goodbye. And the panelists, well, you can do what you like because you're free to go.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.